Hello, and welcome to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efraín Martinez. I am a principal in search of wisdom, and I have found productivity to be a great tool for success. Today, I have the distinguished honor of interviewing the illustrious Dr. Ernesto Matías, who has served a long career in Chicago Public Schools as an assistant principal in Kanoon Magnet School, principal of Wells Community Academy, deputy chief of the Office of Strategic School Support, chief of Network 4, chief of academic officer of the Office of Language and Cultural Education, and most recently, as the education officer at the Illinois State Board of Education. At some point during my trajectory, he dedicated time to guide me with his utmost attention and professionalism. I will forever respect and admire Ernesto, that for me is just a good person. Dr. Ernesto Matias, who are you?
Thank you, Dr. Martinez. It is a pleasure to be here on this podcast, just sharing a little bit of the wisdom that I've learned in my 32-year career and just providing some encouragement and supports to our fellow educators who are out there fighting the good fight of trying to educate our kids in spite of the many difficulties and barriers we face every day. So thank you for having me here this morning.
A luxury. So can you please walk us through your professional trajectory up to this point?
Yes, I started my career as a high school teacher in Northeast Montana at Lester Christian High School. I was there for 3 years. I had attended there as a student from my sophomore through senior year. And those folks in Lester really taught me a lot about life, love, hard work, and how to be present every day when you're working. I followed that up with moving to Evansville, Indiana, where I taught for 3.5 years, close to 4, at Evansville Bosse High School. Again, I'm a government history teacher and enjoyed my time there, learned a lot before I came back to Chicago to work at Moose Elementary School under Donald Fumo. When I came in for the interview, he took one look at me and he said, I know the face, don't know the name. If you're here, you made it, you're hired. He was my 6th grade teacher when I was at Moose Elementary School many, many years ago. And so although he didn't recognize the name, he recognized the face. And that's how I was hired. I followed that with 6 years as an assistant principal at Kanoon Magnet under Juanita Saucedo. And Mildred Arroyo was my fellow assistant principal. And they taught me a lot about educating, focused, follow through investigations. And then I was called to Wells Community Academy, where I was the 5th principal in 3 years. And a lot of fights in the very beginning, but we were able, in our term, love our students to success. Eventually, we were able to get off of probation, which they were on for something like 13 or 16 years, depending on the data you're looking at. And then I turned that over to one of my resident principals who took it to the next level. Became the assistant deputy for OS4 under Barbara Bird, and was there for about 7 months before I was promoted to chief of Network 4. And in chief of Network 4, met outstanding principals who were doing outstanding jobs. And I was just there to help them, to support them, to move them along on their career trajectory. And then followed by a stint with the Office of Language and Cultural Education, overseeing all of the EL programs and refugee programs in Chicago before I was called by the first Latina and woman of color state superintendent, Dr. Carmen Ayala, to serve as the education officer here in the state of Illinois. And so it's been an adventure, especially from a kid from Humboldt Park who grew up around gangs and all of that, not ever expecting to make it, in my terminology as an adult, just to be here today with you and hopefully sharing some words of encouragement.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. Let's peel that onion a little bit. One of the things I always admire you is that in any place that you have been, you have always talked about your life's trajectory and the challenges that you had to overcome. I wonder, when did Ernesto decided, I want to be a teacher?
You know what? When I was finished with my high school in Montana, I came to Moody Bible Institute because coming from a religious family, wanted a strong foundation in what I believe. And while there, one of my professors, Dr. Rasher, spoke to me and said, "Hey, are you willing to depend on the church to provide you a salary?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he explained that in order to really make money with what I loved, you would need to be in a bigger church that had a bigger youth group to do. And then he talked me through, why not public education? Why not becoming a teacher? You can get to be in front of kids and impact the lives of students while getting a consistent paycheck. And so, because my life goal has always been to help kids similar to myself who had no hope, who were thinking about surviving every day without a through plan for adulthood, I jumped at the chance. And this is the only thing I've known for 32 years is education.
Wow. This concept of loving students, I'm trying to put two and two. Is that come from your religious background?
You know, I would say that, and I also would say I have a mentor. His name is Paul Strazala, who's been with me now for 45 years. He's a retired lieutenant firefighter from Bentonville, Illinois. And the love unconditionally that he showed me throughout the years, coupled with my faith, are the two guiding factors in loving students and now moving beyond the classroom, just loving people and trying to be a dream maker for people and trying to coach people and enable them to become their greatest self in the service of our country.
It's
I know it
beautiful.
sounds idealistic, but I remain that way after 32 years and things that have happened. I strongly believe that where possible, we're loving people to success and helping motivate them to hopefulness so that they too can impact the lives of others, especially in education.
Beautiful. We need that so much, especially in this world of social media, that our children crumble when they don't get a like or an
Right.
attention. This sense of love students to success, I think, is something that we should all emulate. So, Ernesto, how did your life change when you go from being a teacher to becoming an assistant principal?
Wow. Um, Donald Fumo, the principal who hired me at Moose Elementary, sat on top of my desk in room 106 and talked me into going for my master's in administrative leadership. And I didn't want to, but he was very persistent. And eventually I said, okay, I will. The difference in the classroom is that you have 30 students if you're lucky, right? Because Chicago, you may have more than 30 students
More.
in your classroom. But the students you have in your classroom is your impact. Moving to an assistant principal was a greater impact of understanding how a school runs and being able to fulfill the vision and the dream of the principal and collectively that community. And so going to a little village, I thought I knew Mexican culture growing up in Humboldt Park, but I didn't. It was a whole new world for me and one that I enjoyed and loved. And Juanita was really, really outstanding in her desiring that Kanoon become an outstanding school and allowing Mildred and I some of the liberties and freedoms that we needed in order to grow in our own as leaders without jealousies, without any of that, realizing that we were there to support her. She enabled us and empowered us to do the work.
Beautiful. Once you become a principal at Wells, um, What was your plan of entry, and how did that evolve through the time?
So I was hired August 8th, 2008, after I had turned them down, central office down several times, because I had promised my kids at Kanoon that I would take them on a whitewater rafting trip, which I was able to do because we partnered with General Woods Boys and Girls Club. And so I did not want to not keep my word to them. And that's really, really important. And so I was willing to give up the principalship in order to keep my words to my students, because I think that lesson was needed for them and for myself. I did not meet the full staff at Wells until August 27th. How do you plan for a school that in 2005 had 1,100 students, and because they closed a school on the west side, the destruction of gangs interacting with other gangs at Manly, Marshall, Clemente, at Wells destabilized those communities and sent a lot of kids, almost 50% of the kids from Wells disappeared, went to other places, so that when I arrived in 2008, only 652 kids were present at that school. The staff was demoralized, a lot of violence. My introduction to that was on September 26th. There was a code blue. When I went to the fight scene, which was in the lunchroom, chairs were flying. We had a number of kids arrested. I called for it. A number of kids were transported to the hospital. A pivotal moment for me was that November, as the kids were leaving, I had this thing where I was like, man, I might not see them again. And so I stood in the middle doors as they were leaving and trying to touch as many of them on the shoulder. Hey, come back, come back. And a couple of them said, Matías, what's up? I said, I just really need you to come back. Just be safe. And so following that Monday, when they came back, I would stand and I start hugging as many kids as I could. And so some of the kids were hug me not, and I understood, because I'm a sexual abuse survivor myself, and I understood something's happened, that touch is not their thing. Fine. Then we'd play the game of me trying to hug them, and then, you okay? Yes. We started to change the culture of Wells from one that really did not understand how to love children to success, to one who was willing to see each student come in, give them a high five, a hug, a smile. Sometimes when the kids came in, and I remembered one or two examples where their back stiffened, and I'd whisper, were you sexually abused? Yes, I was too. If you ever need to talk to someone, we have people. At other times, we would have kids come in almost in tears. What's going on? Someone's died and they're back. I said, why are you here? And I would call Edwin Caraballo, our social worker, and he'd come down to take care of that student. So by the time I was done, and I was there for 5 years, other staff members were also hugging kids, high-fiving kids, And so when you talk about an entry plan, how do you enter a school to fix, right, the instructional component, but also the social emotional component at the same time and be effective? And we know that working in transformation, low performing schools is a yeoman's work to trying to get it off. But I would say this: unconditional love for students, providing transparent structures for staff, hiring good people, and then eventually, when you gain the trust of the staff, then I turn my attention to cleaning up some of the staff. Those that we could help, we would help. Those that we couldn't, we had to do the E3 process to get them out, and about 3 teachers did that. But again, after 13 or 16 years, getting off of probation for the year was an incredible highlight for me. And so when you talk about an entry plan, besides meeting people, meeting the community, the power players around Wells Community Academy, it was, how am I going to interact with the students? How am I going to love on the students? How am I going to be visible in the school so that I'm in the classroom, knowing what's going on? How am I going to empower the teachers through our ILT, the instructional leadership team, to really do their work? And then how am I coaching teachers who who have leadership aspirations so that they take on more responsibility at school, while I know that futuristically, if they get really good at it, someone else is going to take them from me. But that's okay, because we're spreading the idea that we can bring hope to the hopeless by loving them to success.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, especially being a survivor. I'm sure that that influenced your mission and throughout your life. Did you ever feel coming from being an AP in a K-8 building? Did you ever feel in the high school like, what did I get myself into? I'm not sure if I can do this, or were you confident all the way through?
No, I wasn't. And in fact, there is a bathroom in the office at Wells. And I always get to school at least 2 hours early, an hour and a half early. And so I remember that first year going into that bathroom, looking at myself in the mirror, and for a few seconds, reminding myself, I am a principal, I am a principal, I am a principal, because I was still the little kid who was crying himself to sleep, not understanding why things were happening to him. And I had to give myself a visual reminder that I was the leader of the school. I wasn't overly confident. What I did know was that I can love students. What I did know was I could connect with people. What I did know was that I'm not threatened by smart people being around me, as long as we're on the same team for the same purpose. And so one of the biggest outside influences that we brought to school to develop a cultural framework was the Kids at Hope, created by Rick Miller out of Phoenix. And basically, the Kids at Hope model saw kids as assets. They're talented, smart, and capable of success. And as an adult, I am going to try, my staff is going to try everything that we can to make them a success. And so, again, using some of those tactics, it was easy to go along with my desire to love each student to success. Could we save each student? No. We went to many funerals. One of them, Octavius Lamb, was the first casualty of the new year 2012. He was an outstanding student who, getting off of work, was headed home. The CTA buses didn't run all night, decided to go to a party, and in that party, don't know what happened. But that amazing staff at Wells, in a matter of a week, raised $7,000 that I was able to help pay for the funeral, and then gave the remaining money to the mom with some words of encouragement. And so I know that educating kids is hard. I know that being in low performing, high violence schools is hard, but that's where the real work is. That's where you're saving lives, literally. If you can move kids from hopelessness to hopefulness and view themselves as having talent, skills, and abilities, man, that's half the battle. The rest, you provide mentors for them that can then walk them through applying for college, applying for a job, housing, whatever they need. Then we've really done our jobs to promote a quality education for kids, and we expand what success means. Success isn't always a college education. For me, success is being a productive citizen in whatever means you have work related to provide for your family and your own future family members. And so, yeah, it was a pleasure. And a lot of that was driven by my own trauma as a child, helping me to understand research, but real experience, and meshing both in order to really productively move the school along.
Thank you so much, Ernesto. So, Ernesto, then you are promoted and you have several chief positions.
Yes.
How does your life change when being on the trenches on the ground and then you get into those positions?
I think that with more responsibilities comes the heavier weight and the anxiety of wanting to do a good job. The one uncompromising thing I had in my heart was, if it's not about the students, then I don't want to hear it. And Chicago is extremely political, and a lot of good people get caught up in wanting the fame, wanting the money. And I've always been of the opinion that you're going to die. You can't take it with you. So if you can't take it with you, then what really matters? What really matters is my focus on educating the kids. So when I moved up to those levels, It was, how can I help support the principals and assistant principals and staff members in order for them to rejuvenate their desire to impact the kids, in order to get them from the feeling of hopelessness to hopefulness. Some of those things were contextual. Not all of the schools in Network 4 were the same. You had really outstanding schools, and then you had schools who were struggling as well. And so as a leader, learning how to distinguish my supports according to the data that I was seeing myself, that I was reviewing about each particular school, but all the same. Instead of focusing on my day-to-day contact with students, like when I was a principal, now it's with the school leadership. And how do I inspire them? How do I get them to change their minds? How do I get to understand who they are so that they can better serve their staff? Leadership is complicated, but then leadership is simple. You know, if I treat my leaders how I want to be treated, then I think we're going to get to a happy place where we're productively looking at data, asking the serious questions, and improving the systems that we have at our school level, or creating those systems in order to deeply impact the lives of students. I think the other thing I would say is this: parents became even more important. At OLCE, the CMPC, the bilingual advisory councils, were such a major part of what we did, training them to ask the question. So for example, giving them data on schools, and we did. We gave them the data on how many EL students were at their particular schools, and then how many bilingual teachers and how many EL teachers. Then we explained to them, I explained to them the difference between a bilingual and EL, and then further said, hey, if you have an EL teacher with a program 1 year, like the first year from their country here, you need to advocate that that's not what you want, because that teacher is not required to speak that language. That teacher could speak English and your kid could be lost. And so we were doing some of those things and then practicing during the monthly bilingual advisory meetings by networks, so that we were preparing and empowering the parents to be able to advocate for themselves. And I tell you, if we can partner with parents, we can transform any school, irrespective of the politics surrounding that school. And that was a major important learning for me.
Partner with parents. This is such a great advice. So the similar question, how does your life change when you started working with the state? What were some of the glows and what were some of the grows?
You know, I think some of the glows was in a state that has 852 different districts. Being able to visit some of those and seeing the outstanding work throughout the state outside of Chicago, because I was a part of CPS for 23 years. And so being able to see that, and then the recognition that our rural communities are not the enemies of urban. They are struggling differently, and that I needed to become a strong advocate for the sake of my own 6 years living in Northeast Montana. And the other thing that highlighted the statewide was seeing that rural communities were as diverse. Beardstown, for example, in central Illinois, has 49% Latino, 12.2% African American, 1.4% Asian, and another 10% biracial. O sea, 72% of the kids that attend Beardstown, of the 1,402 students, are people of color. And anytime we produce policy that favors the heavily populated areas, we're neglecting those kids. We're neglecting not only our kids of color, but we're neglecting our rural white kids who deserve an opportunity to have a quality education with quality resources at their disposal. And so those are some of the glows. Yes, outstanding leaders across the state, looking at how diverse some of our rural communities were. Some of the areas of growth, I would say, is the pandemic. We lived through it. How do you, as a state agency, support schools through that when you have a lot of factors influencing decision making, right? And so very difficult when you have a state as diverse geographically as we are with human capital, right? With our students. How do you do that equitably across all of it? And then post-pandemic, how do we recover some of the learning that was lost, that do it in such a way that research understands, so that it doesn't become a political soundbite that they're going to recover this in a year? Not possible. You got to give these plans, these strategies, times and sometimes years to really, really be implemented in such a way that maybe in 3 to 5 years, you do see the results of what you've implemented in year one. And so outstanding opportunities for growth, for GLOW, outstanding opportunities to meet other leaders across the country and across the state that are doing meaningful work. It is not as easy as non-educators think it is.
Wow. And last follow-up question. For people who have worked a long time in an urban district that transition into the state, what advice do you have on things to look for and what to think when working in system that is so much wider?
I think number one is comes from cultural anthropology. You got to study it. You got to study the culture geographically of that location when you move up. You got to understand the landmines that appear. You got to understand the people and mindset. You got to be able to figure out where your talent, skills, and ability can add value to that level of leadership that's being asked of you. Secondly, I think that you have to have an open mind. Don't be talking about what you did formally, because people don't want to hear about CPS outside of CPS. What you want to do is hold on to the conceptual frameworks that you've implemented and been successful, and not vis-a-vis demand those be implemented the same way you did. So you throw the concept out there and let the folks wrestle with it, other leaders wrestle with it, and come to a point where they can implement if those ideas will help their students within their own district and school systems. And I think the third, which the third is really number one, you gotta keep it simple. It's about the students. Heidi Hayes Jacobs, a lot of years ago, and she's a year-long curriculum mapping expert, in a conference that I attended, put a chair out there. And she said that that chair represented all of the students that came from all of the different districts across all of our country, of those that were at that conference. The reason we were there, it's for the students. If we had no students, we wouldn't be there. Same concept applies every year since. The reason that we are doing what we're doing is because of students. You can complain about them all you want to, but guess what? If we had no students, you have no job. And so we need to come to the point of really, really unashamedly focusing on the students when we're at the upper levels and our indirect contacts on the students. So now the shift becomes, how are you going to impact that district superintendent, who's going to impact those principals, who are going to impact those teachers and support staff at the school, who are directly going to impact the students. And so you have to think more in terms of adult learning the higher up you go. What you did at a different level may not work. And so you have to evolve as a leader to incorporate some of the best leadership research. And the last thing I would say is study Malcolm Maxwell, study other leaders, Heifetz, study people who are not in education. I think that we get stale sometime when we go to the same well, instead of expanding the literature that we read and the leadership examples that we read in order to get better, so that we can better focus on the kids.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Let me tell you, Ernesto, the first time I met you, we were in the Catalyst board, and you were the chair. And the first encounter I have with this Latino leader, you had a chair in the middle, and I was wondering, I wonder why that chair is in the middle. And you told us the story about that represents the students. Let me tell you, I have emulated that in all my positions that I
Good.
have held, and I always mention I learned this from Ernesto Matias.
Thank you.
So Ernesto, in Back to the Future, If you could go back in time, what will, to any position you have held, any position, what will the Ernesto of today tell the Ernesto of back then?
I think that I would tell myself, learn all that you can to be as good as you can right now. O sea, don't take a break from learning. Don't take a break when you're really, really tired after a 12, 14-hour day. Do that. And secondly, really invest in people. Try to meet them where they're at. Try to help them get to the next level. And then thirdly, I would tell Ernesto, don't forget your family, because I think that one of the casualties of my devotion in a lot of educators is our own nuclear family, right? My kids, now my ex-wife. And a lot of us who start out with partners end up with different partners, different because we have given so much to others that we've neglected. And so, if I were to put them in order, I would put, try to the best of my ability to balance family and work, do as much research as I can on educational leadership. And then the third, just the focused belief that people can change and people really want to do what's best. I think those are the lessons that continue to play. And I'm still as idealistic as I was on day one in 1990 in Northeast Montana, that if you have a group of adult leaders in a classroom together who really, really want to focus on students, the sky's the limit. We can change, transform any system where you have that through and through focus on the lives of each and every student, be they special ed student, be they an EL student, be they low poverty, be they dominant, it doesn't matter. It's each student in each classroom, in each school, in each district, in each state across our country that we're trying to impact. Because if we don't do that, our democracy is in peril. If we don't do that, they're going to grow up in a different kind of society than you and I have had the privilege of growing up. Even with our struggles, we still have had a privileged upbringing in comparison to other people in other countries, because they just don't have the resources or the ability to go to school in peace without bombs flying that we have enjoyed.
Beautiful. Great advice and wise. Let's recognize the Teach Better community.
This podcast is a proud member of the TeachBetter Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. Now let's get back to the episode.
So, Ernesto, as you know, reading is such a luxury. If you will have to gift two books, one fiction and one nonfiction, to a loved one, what will those two books be?
Wow, that's a really, really, really tough question. Let me think about that, because there are so many books going through my head that I would want a loved one to read. And one may not even make the list. There's a kid who grew up in gangs in Chicago, the Latin Kings, who eventually got out and uses pseudonym Raimundo Sanchez, I believe, who wrote the book Once a King, Always a King. And I would say, and it's a true life story and change of characters, that the end of the book, he talks about the impact of his sexual abuse, because he was sexually abused. And so in The Making of a Latin King, he explained how that sexual abuse, and coming from Puerto Rico to Humboldt Park, Chicago, and all that happened during that time frame shaped his vulnerabilities in order to join a gang and what ensued in his life. And I would say that's important work, because as a male sexual abuse survivor, we don't talk about its impact on us. We do a lot of things that we think, we're just that way, without trying to find a root cause of why we have turned and done what we've done. And so that's definitely one of the books that I would offer a family member to understand context, but also if they're a male and they've experienced sexual abuse, to get help as soon as possible, because it may cost you your marriage. It may cost you friendships. It may cost you your livelihood if you don't get tools to negate the negative impacts or consequences of being abused as a child. So that's one. The second book, man, I think the second book would be any biographies like Harriet Tubman. The fact that she was uneducated and she went back and forth to free similarly placed African that were slaves here, and the courage, even with the events happening in 1850s, with the slavery acts that were passed, and being in Canada, she still went back down south, and she never lost a person. And I'd say that because one person can make a difference. There are descendants of that one person, of Harriet Tubman, of the people she saved, who are still impacting, the world. The second one that I would say is Supreme Justice Sotomayor. That her story is incredible for a Latina growing up in New York, right? And where she is today as an example of what we can do. And in both examples, you see that like success is driven by opportunity and by our own willingness to sacrifice and work as hard as we can in order to achieve the goal of impacting humanity. And both of these ladies in different time frames have impacted the society they've lived in for the greater good. And so those are two books or three things that come to mind, those biographies, and then the Raimundo Sanchez book on Once a King, Always a King.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Ernesto, who is or who are your biggest influences?
I've had the privilege at every level of my life to meet outstanding people. So growing up, my grandmother, obviously, Abuela Angelina Falero, was the foundational biggest influence, I would say, followed by Paul Strazala. And he's still alive, and we still get together, and we have a trip coming up. Stanley J., who's now passed, he was a Chinese American who introduced me to Paul. And then I've had leaders throughout Efrain, Donald Fumo, who gave me an opportunity at Moose Elementary, Barbara Bird Bennett, who promoted me, right, in Chicago. I've had outstanding leaders like Denise Little, Carlos Ascotia, who's been a mentor, Juanita Salcedo, Dr. Cynthia Behrens, Dr. Steve Tozer from UIC, continue to be mentors to me and help me. And then other folks like yourselves, like Efrain, with what you were doing before you left Chicago in the school that you were with, are people who may not always see me or give me advice, but knowing that you're out there, to me, that's an indirect mentorship influence that I got to stay the course. Don't compromise on loving people. Don't compromise on desiring that the people I work with can turn around and impact the lives of others. Sometimes it could be messy. I'm not saying that it's all hunky-dory, easy, but I do believe that love conquers all, and that you, through love, provide these rich opportunities to the students that we serve, to the leadership that we're serving, the aspiring Latino, African-American, general leaders, white leaders that we serve. The mentors that I've mentioned come from Paul is white. Stanley was Chinese. My grandmother's Puerto Rican. Donald Fumo is Italian. Denise Little, Barbara Bird Bennett, all of those from different races, different ethnicity. Love knows no culture. Love knows no racism. Love knows no boundaries, right? And so that's the message I would want to get across today, that if you unconditionally love people, even when you have to let them go, if you afford them their dignity when you say we have to part ways, then you are having a legacy of love that they can respect and that they can move on with their lives to something else. On the other hand, if hate wins, we know what's going to happen. If hate is allowed to percolate and our collective trauma that we bring to leadership allowed to manifest itself out in how we deal with people who are working with and for us, then we're going to promulgate, right, those systems of injustices and promote leaders that will be full of hate, that will be full of, things that we don't want, toxicity in education. And so that's why, in all that I've talked about, love is the preeminent understanding that I have on how I have to navigate through this world, which means I have to forgive people who've wronged me, like the 2 men who sexually abused me. I have to forgive those who bullied me when I was a kid. I have to forgive teachers who aren't doing their jobs right after I do what I have to do to correct those issues. And so that's why I would cover things in love and say that in our state, in our districts, in our nation, educators need to take the mantle of healers as well. We need to speak in terms of love, mercy, forgiveness, grace. We need to focus it on kids as we speak to political leaders in a way that's respectful, not talking over their heads, not interrupting them, but waiting your turn to speak. And then when you speak, formulating the words that will impact the heart and mind, not just the mind, right? Because you need an emotional response to the words that we are utilizing to try to harness their support for whatever projects we need for our students or whatever volunteers that we need to help support the effort. And so,
wow, this interview has become a masterclass. I'm so grateful you took the time, Ernesto. My last wisdom question before we go to productivity is psychologists call this imposter syndrome. And you mentioned that at some point you will face the mirror and remind yourself that you were the principal of the school. How do you address this being in so many positions, and what advice do you have for those in the trenches?
I think that self-reflection is a big thing of leaders as well as normal people who don't have leadership. And you really have to know yourself at every level. You really have to focus in internally on who you are and what you're willing to compromise, what you're not willing to compromise. And so the advice I would give to anyone is write a journal. Who are you? What is your why? The book, right? Like, why do you do? Is it about the money? Is it about power? Is it about influence? Those things are limiting. Those things will not go to the grave with you. What will go is what Dr. Viktor Frankl, when he wrote his seminal book, Man's Meaning or Search for Meaning, is like, what's the reason that you're living? What's your why? Like our impact on society is really what Ephraim wants to know is, why is Ephraim here, right? Like, how do you come to terms that you are living during this time frame, and what is your impact, right? What's your major contribution in the little circles of influence that we run around in order to better people's lives, our students' lives, change the trajectory of their families forever. And so I would say that starts with self-reflection, being honest about our strengths and our weaknesses, what we compromise, what we don't compromise, but all the time moving forward to the greater question of, like, why am I here? What do I want to leave behind? We can't manipulate legacy. Legacy is what Ephraim says about me when I die, or his former students say about Ephraim when they die. He was an outstanding leader. I remembered he was funny, he was loving, he was sensitive, he gave me words of encouragement. She spoke words to me that I didn't want to hear, but they did it in such a way that it motivated me towards fulfilling my life's dream of becoming a lawyer, doctor, or a very faithful housewife, husband, a stay-at-home husband, or whatever you chose to do in your life, right? And so our legacy is what people say about us when we're gone. It is not the monuments. That's part of it, but that's really not it. It's the human trophies that walk around speaking about the great work that you Dr. Martinez and others are currently doing.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Ernesto. So this show has a component of productivity because is perhaps the key component that makes people succeed. If they know how to get organized, if they know how to get things done. So, but this looks different for every kind of person that I interview. What does it look for you? How does Ernesto get organized and still have a fructiferous life?
Well, you'd asked me a question about what changed in order for me to get into education. And I would say for me is anchored in my faith. What do I really believe? What do I really believe about Creator? Um, is there enough evidence for my belief system? And if there is, and I'm sure of that, then what's required of me as a person of faith, right? That's number one. Number two, what is, to my understanding, the purpose of my life? And right now, I would tell you that the purpose of my life is to do the greatest good for the many people that I come in contact with, whether I am in a restaurant, walking the streets, whether a homeless person comes to me, it doesn't matter. The greatest good, if I have money, you give it. If you have a kind word to a waitress or a waiter, you give it. If you can say thank you to someone who's cashing you out of jewels, you give it. So the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Number three, in my chosen profession, which is in education, there's layers to it. But number one, as a leader, can I marshal like-minded leaders to present a comprehensive strategy in order to bring hope to the hopeless via providing a quality education, right? Number two, am I personally still coaching people to achieve their dreams, irrespective of who they are, what they look like, what religious background they come from? Am I actively engaged in reproducing leaders for the system? Because we absolutely need leaders of diverse backgrounds and colors to fill the gaps for us moving forward. And so I organize it that way because I believe that knowing who I am or my faith then propels me forward to why am I here? To provide the greatest good for the greatest amount of people by collaborating and bringing leaders together with a single focus of improving the lives of students from hopelessness to hopefulness, and individually coaching them where opportunities are given so that they can maximize their talent, skills, and ability for the greater good of their school, their district, the country.
Beautiful. And Ernesto, in very practical ways, how do you organize your calendar?
Obviously, you got to put the stuff in your calendar and have a reminder of what you're doing. I also think, so one, making sure that the events you have, like when you send me a calendar invite, make sure it was there. You followed up with a text to me last night, and then this morning gave me another. And so making sure that it's there. Number two, if at all possible, you may carry a notebook to write down these things down that you have to do in order to transfer it. Because in the beginning of my career, I would double, triple schedule everything, right? And I didn't keep it as organized, but these are things that you learn by sometimes trial and error, by reading research, by asking people who are very, very well organized, what's the trick of the trade in order for us not to miss important meetings or conferences or conversations that may be life-altering for us if we do miss those.
Beautiful. Another thing I have to tell you that I started taking notes. One time you met in my office, and I don't remember what was the purpose, but you had your journal or your notebook, and you were taking notes, and it looked like an artist was taking notes. Do you think when you do that things you think things twice? Like what is the art behind of taking notes?
I think all of us have some triggers that remind us of certain topics or conversations. And for me, those words, those figures, those stick figures that you put down for me remind me of the conversation so that I don't have to read a lot. I can just look at times and say, okay, got it. That's the purpose, and that's what I have to move on. And so it's a good observation that you bring up, that we have to use the form of communication that we ourselves understand, that we don't have to decode because we know what we're putting down in writing. And I understand that some people may take their phone and may talk to their phone like a recorder, right? In order to do that and then to transcribe it later on. Whatever form you use, you have to take a look at the end result. Are you double scheduling? Are you missing appointments? And if you're not, then your system is working for you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Ernesto, I imagine when you were working with the state, you had to do a lot more of traveling. While you were traveling, did you listen to music? Did you listen to books, or maybe silence? What was happening there? Tell us.
Well, the truth of the matter is, I was in meetings while I was traveling. And so you had phone calls that you had to take. The brief times where that wasn't happening, I would listen to music that was uplifting, music that would inspire me. Besides religious music, the music of the 70s and 80s and Latino music really helped settle me down, because sometimes you're traveling to a speaking engagement, and the anxiety, the fear, am I going to be engaging? Am I going to be informative? Will they listen? Are they ready for me? Comes to mind. And so any of that, apart from the calls that I had to make or was receiving, that would settle me, type of music that I would listen to. Every once in a while, I would listen to podcasts or to YouTube reports on things that I really needed that information. But generally speaking, I was on the phone about this, that, or the other thing.
Okay, that's fine. And you went through a doctorate and had to write some sort of a dissertation or exit work. What advice do you have in terms of organizing yourself to get that document done?
I think that the best advice I received was to figure out when your productivity is at its highest. Some people are night owls, some people are morning, right? But where is it? And then doing a schedule of a little bit of reading and writing as you went along in order to get it accomplished. Because as you know, writing a dissertation is not for the faint-hearted, and it takes a long time with a lot of editing to produce a finished product that the committee would accept and that would honor you with your doctorate, be it a PhD or an EDD. And so having a schedule for when to write at your best time that you can write, really important, and the times that you can read, really important. For those of us who are in education and who are leaders in education, man, that's really difficult, because again, when I talked about work-life balance or family balance, a doctorate takes a lot away from your family as well. And so how do you mesh the real life responsibilities of working that gives you your paycheck to pay for your bills with a doctorate that may further your educational aspiration with the family that you love and that you want to be there and present with, and any other responsibilities. So figuring out how you're going to manage all of that, knowing that there's going to be an imbalance, and typically the imbalance is against family. And so you got to count the cost before you get into it. Are you willing to give up all that time apart from work that then your family is not getting? And those are really difficult questions that if I knew what was going to happen, I may have done it differently, because as you get older, your kids are older, your investment in your kids come out on whether they spend a lot of time with you or don't spend a lot of time with you. And I think that is connected to how much time you invested in them. And as educators, we all know that impacting the lives of others is paramount. So we tend to forget or reduce the time that we would spend with our family. So that's what I would say. Set up a calendar, understand, that you're not going to receive a balance, but to the best of your ability, try to balance your commitments so that you do spend quality time with the family, even if it means 1 week at a month, your family is out of the house and you're together in Airbnb or traveling to see other family members, or just focusing on them without distractions.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And when the curtains close and Dr. Ernesto Matias take off the professional that we know, what do you do for fun? What maybe there's talents that we don't know that you have. What happens?
So couple things. One, I have 2 grandsons, Gatlin Maverick and Ezekiel. And I spend a lot of time. I'll babysit whenever they need me to. So that's my number one passion, is them. And I speak to them only in Spanish because I want them to be bilingual as they grow up. The second one is research. For my family, the Faleros, the Matias, I am doing family research. And like with the Faleros, we can trace it back to 1829, Alino Faleros and Martinez. Maybe we're related back there in the family tree, Efrain. And so I'm trying to get as many pictures. And so right now I have a 15-page document on the Falero side, and then I'm working on the Matias side. My hope is to be able to internally for our family have our histories down, and then like my dad was a part of 17 siblings, I want each chapter to be someone in that direct, my cousins writing those, but I'm doing all of the pre-work to set it up for them and formatting so that they can do it. That takes a lot of time. And then the third thing is working out. The older you get, you got to work out. So I try to get to the gym 4 or 5 times a week, looking forward for the warmer weather so that I can start running and taking my vitamins every day, which is really important.
That's awesome. Ernesto, I'm so impressed. Any last thoughts for the listeners and viewers of the show?
Yes. Going with the theme, you have to love yourself too. And if you don't love yourself and forgive yourself for the things that you've done wrong, that bitterness, resentfulness will grow, and it'll be a millstone around your neck as you get older. And so wherever possible, give yourself enough grace. Forgive yourself, do something symbolic, write the things you've done down on a piece of paper and put a match to it and say, okay, from this day forward, I'm not looking in the rearview mirror. I'm looking forward to my future, knowing that I'm trying to become a better human being, a better person in all facets of my life. And the second one, is really to answer the question of why are you here? Why are you still in education? If you've lost your fire, how do you regain the fire and a purpose of leading with a heart, of leading with data, of being able to provide a quality education by influencing the leaders who actually are at the building level doing it? And so, I think that it's really, really important. And then the last thing, the impact of the pandemic is still reverberating through each and every one of us. It is no shame to go get counseling help. It is no shame to find people you can trust and confide in, to let them know, because it's real and we live it every day. And in these uncertain times, we need to get some of these things out of our system so that it doesn't impact the lens by which we lead. Because a lot of time, leaders aren't taken care of. And if we don't focus on taking care of our leaders, a lot of our leaders will leave education to do other things that are less stressful. And so we need to do those things in order to be our best for the people we serve. We have to take care of ourselves.
Ernesto, I feel so grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the ability to be here. Enjoy.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efrain Martinez.
Chulo.
And I love that production. Chill out.